Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the final race of the cross season of Wout van Aert, the penultimate round of the Cyclocross World Cup in Maasmechelen, and with me here as always my sidekick Issam. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
As said, it was the penultimate round of the Cyclocross World Cup, but there was not much attention on the battle for the overall. Michael van Toerenhout largely had that wrapped up. Instead, the attention went out to a battle between Mathieu van der Poel and Wout van Aert. Thibaut Nys didn't start because he was quote-unquote sick. It later turned out that he wasn't actually sick, but just didn't feel entirely fit on Wednesday, decided to take one day off the bike. He did a proper training today. It was out of precaution that he didn't start. More injury news before the race as Van der Poel announced that he had broken his rib in that crash in Loenhout and that is why he skipped those other races to let it recover a bit more. It quickly turned out that in the race that injury didn't hamper him at all. Despite comments saying, I don't know how I'll feel on the cross bike, it was clear he was feeling fine. Van Aert needed to move his way up from the fourth start row, made a couple of mistakes. First, in the first lap, he hit a pole on the inside facing backwards. He managed to ride back up, but then took a tumble, which allowed Van der Poel to take off. The world champion cruised to victory, winning by 1 minute 14 over Van Aert, who despite some mistakes finished second. It wasn't really a closely contested race because Nieuwenhuis rode in third for most part of the race, holding a small gap over Joran Wiesure. Issam, I think you've been clear about two things these couple of weeks, right? So in your preview, you almost called it a disgrace that some people were placing Nys or Van Aert on the same level, the same step of the mountain as Van der Poel. And secondly, that Van Aert, his technical skills were just completely lacking this season. I remember some sections from the Gulligem podcast, but also Dendermonde. Both things turned out to be true here today, right? Van der Poel, despite this injury talk, was fit. He, as you said, make no mistake, will be the favorite for a world title, and he delivered just that today. A performance that was in every aspect better than Van Aert, technically, physically, everything.
Yeah, and Van der Poel was definitely not in a hurry during this race. He was, I wouldn't say patience, but he chose his moment, and of course Van Aert kind of gave that moment to him. I don't really think that it was because of or due to Van Aert and his mishap that Van der Poel thought it's now the moment to attack. I think that was just kind of the nature of the course and the way it went. I think that was the right moment to go. And as you said, yeah, I think today it was again obvious to an extent how bad Van Aert is technically and how much he's lacking in terms of feeling. It was today, I think he said it himself, silly mistakes. That is, in a sense, it's of course quite normal that is happening because he didn't do many races. He didn't really focus all too much towards this cyclocross season. For him, obviously, his goals are more going to be laid in the road campaign and the classics, and he wants to be optima forma in that regard when that is going to arrive. So cyclocross is basically more a thing he does because of the fans and the entourage and his love for the sport. And I think that is just visible again today. I'll be honest, I think that in the first couple of times when he had the crash, then he came back, it looked quite strong. I think it was a good outing, but again, you cannot make that many mistakes, especially with a guy like Van der Poel, who I didn't see that many mistakes from him today. He was spot on. He never overstepped it. He was able to pace himself so well. And I think today was a clear statement. He didn't say it, but it was very visible. I am here and I am the one that you have to beat. Don't make any illusions in thinking that you're able to beat me if nothing happens to me. In a sense, it was a masterclass on a very tricky course today. He was able to be, I think, out of all the riders, the one with the least mistakes, and he got through it quite well.
Van Aert has probably watched a bit too much of the Baltimore Ravens. A few fumbles too much early in the game, which really cost him the opportunity. A bit too much Mark Andrews in him. And if we're staying in the NFL terms, there's this pundit that always has the Patrick Mahomes mountain where he ranks the quarterbacks and always put Mahomes on one. I almost feel like we should have a cyclocross version, and if we do it, it would also be the Van der Poel mountain, because he has comfortably been on top of there for the past 2 seasons. Van Aert struggled a lot on that off-camber, and as you said, Issam, and I will just repeat it one final time because this is the last race of his season, Van Aert doesn't care about his results in cyclocross. He has realized that he needs to be at his absolute best. His 102% game is what he needs to deliver in the Tour of Flanders and Paris-Roubaix to win those races. He does not have the luxury that a rider like Van der Poel has, who can maybe afford to lose 0.5% by trying to pick up that cyclocross world title. Van Aert can do much better technically than this. We have seen that in the past. He, however, needs to put in the hours, get the feeling on the cross bike, and that's something he hasn't done this season. His priorities are elsewhere. That's completely fine. It's also fine that he doesn't win here today, right? I don't feel any need to slander him. It's a logical consequence of the choices he made that his technical abilities are where they are now. That's not a setback, that is expectations. I think, and especially if you just hear what the team around him is saying, we're not focusing on cross, we're doing it for fun, we're doing it for the fans, we're doing it because it's his first love. That's really resonating with me, because if you look at his performances, they are exactly that. Of course, the media will always hope and hype others because it is Wout van Aert and they want to put somebody next to Van der Poel. They want a challenger, and I, deep in my heart, also want that, right? I prefer closer racing than a Van der Poel walkover, how impressive that may be. So that makes sense from that aspect, but if you just listen to what the team has been telling us ever since they announced the start of his cross season, this is pretty much what they told would happen, and it did happen.
Yeah, exactly. I think that they were very clear. They were very honest as well in that regard. I think there's a lot of people hope that it would be maybe a little bit different because it would spice things up, I guess, because we see basically that for Van der Poel it's going to be difficult to find someone that is going to challenge him tomorrow maybe, and also in the Worlds. I think that's just going to be very hard. I think that one of the things that I liked about the post-race interview of Van Aert is really that he really pointed out that he has this love for the sport, and he really loved the fans, and he's kind of missing this thing that he had going with the sport, in which he was basically from first race of the season till the last. The thing that I liked the most about it is that he said that he was definitely thinking and eyeing to come back and have a proper cyclocross season and do it quote unquote for real in a way. And I think that's nice to hear, because he's definitely someone that we would love to have in cyclocross, and he's definitely someone that if he takes it a little bit more serious, he's definitely someone that could bring up a challenge and that could be one of the best, if not the best. So that would be great to look forward to, but he didn't enclose any details or what is going to happen, so we have to wait and see how that will play out. And careers sometimes go a little bit different than we try and predict and project.
Enough about those front two, the big two, if you will. Let's look at the third place battle. I don't really think we can call it a battle, because Nieuwenhuis, despite the small margin over Viseure, was constantly in control. I don't think I ever had the feeling that Viseure would come back. Nevertheless, it was a strong outing by Nieuwenhuis. I feel I'm not surprised by it, but that I should note it's impressive, right? I have forgotten if I mentioned this last week or not, but the decision of the team to withhold him from competition for so long, in the end, paid off. Where in the beginning, they wanted to rush him back into competition, and it was like, oh, next week, just delayed by another week, delayed by 2 weeks. The turning point where they said, okay, until further notice, he's just going to train in Spain until he's fit enough to restart racing, that paid off really well. If you recall way back to the start of the season, we had a lot of these discussions about Ronhaar and Nijs, like, which way is the best to come back from an injury, from tiredness, from illness? How do you deal with that? With Nieuwenhuis, it looks like they found a very good way to return him into competition. With this third place, he's positioning himself as a candidate for a medal next week at the World Championships, just like he did last season. That's obviously the only thing that can salvage his season, right? If he gets a medal there, he's probably going to look back on a good season, else he'll probably try and take the positives, like, okay, the end of the season was good, I performed well in all the races I did, but yeah, it's a wasted season. Whereas if he ends on the podium next week, he will be much more positive. I do think he has the right to be positive already based on today's race, because he looked strong. Ultimately, it was a very power-dependent course despite all the features in the men elite race. Because the pace was so high, technical skills and abilities, mistakes were of far less importance than in the women's race, which we'll come to in a bit. At least that's how I observed it, Issam. Do you think that's the right assessment? Power over skills in the men's race, whereas it was more balanced in the women's race?
Yeah, I think it may have influenced some riders, but overall, I definitely would tend to agree with your assessment, because I think that it was just the pace was so high because of those guys up front that I think they were kind of forced into that pace in which there is not really, the mistakes. They will creep up in a way, but it's just it became such a hard race to an extent, and it wasn't really tactical. As you said, Viseur was there or thereabout with Nieuwenhuis, but he never really had a chance to put Nieuwenhuis under pressure. I think that Nieuwenhuis was able to have that battle under control. I wouldn't say quite easily, but he was able to do so. And yeah, I think for Nieuwenhuis, it's positive. I mean, overall, it has been positive from the start. Is the national championships were quite a surprise. I think that Benidorm, he surprised me there also a little bit, because if there is one race that could hurt you so badly in a way if you are not really having the rhythm, it will be Benidorm, and he was able to maintain that quite well. He didn't have the greatest of starting places and still managed to be in the mix somewhat. And I think today it's a bit of a slower course, at least due to the circumstances. Power comes in it, and he loves that. It's going to be interesting, because he's now in the mix probably tomorrow as well. And he is also now a name that you slowly but surely will mention more and more towards Liévin for a podium.
In that context, we should also discuss Joran Viseur. Last week, someone commented that I didn't give enough nuance on his performance in Benidorm because the course didn't suit him. That's probably a fair point, as I didn't mention that, and that undeniably contributed to his disappointing result last week in Benidorm. Nevertheless, I am still a bit in the dark on where Viseur stands. He's been inconsistent this season. Pretty much the entire season, but especially over the Christmas period. I feel that since Hulst, he had that good race in Zonhoven. I remember he did very well when I was there. Then, on the other hand, he has also had a couple of more disappointing performances. Diegem, despite being a fast course, he should definitely do better than 15th there. A few of the other races, which were somewhat less contested, like Kolkzijde, I would qualify his performance there also as somewhat disappointing. Upon reflection, though, I feel that my expectations following that win in Ruddervoorde have caused me to be overly harsh on Viseur this season. If you purely look at his results, he has delivered. He finished third in Dendermonde in the mud. Sure, his Belgian championship wasn't amazing, but it also wasn't horrible. He sat at the back there quite a bit. He has been up there. Yes, there have been a few lows, but far less than I remember. And as said, I'm probably holding him to a much higher standard following that win in Ruddervoorde than what is actually fair to do for him. He has been good here. He was not too far off the third place of Nieuwenhuis. Of course, Thibaut Nys was at home today with the Klaas van Tornout illness. They admitted to it being not a real illness, just a precautionary action. He just didn't feel like two heavy races, especially with rain forecasted for today's race, being a good plan for the Worlds. And that's completely a fair decision. It will be interesting there. Personally, I had perhaps expected Toon Aerts to be in the mix a bit more. He finished 5th, and in that regard, it was really across for the big engines, right? With also Van Toerenhout finishing 6th. Probably those two riders will be slightly disappointed today, Issam.
Yeah, I definitely think that Van Toerenhout is going to be somewhat disappointed, but I feel that he also is going to take with him in a way the fact that classification is almost in the bag. I feel that for him that is also going to be something that he takes with him into these races, the World Cups. I don't know if it's mathematically still possible for him to lose, but he's able to keep Toon Aerts within bay. I think for Aerts it was all right. I don't know if he's going to be that disappointing. He probably would have liked to be more in the mix, but I felt that he was in a position which is not a surprising position, to be honest. I think that if you look at his season so far and look at the races that he has done, it kind of comes around where he finished today again. It's not out of the ordinary. I feel that it was an okay outing as well for Aerts, as it has been, to be honest, this for the entirety of the season. I think that I maybe expected a little bit more from him on certain courses that he was maybe able to just capitalize a little bit more on. I felt that he kind of let that slip away from him. But overall, I feel that for Aerts it has been a very solid season, especially the way he had to enter the season, and that's just always a bit tricky. But I feel that for him as well, it was not a terrible race, and the same goes for Van Toerenhout, obviously.
Certainly not a terrible race, but I can't help but think they will be slightly disappointed to miss out on a podium on a course that suits them quite well. They didn't completely fall through the ice or something and have a real bad day, which you can maybe make more the case for Stringa had, or Iserbyt. Iserbyt had a puncture early on, but never really got into the race. Nevertheless, Aerts and Van Toerenhout are riders that want to be on the podium, so there'll probably be a tad of disappointment. But again, I haven't mentioned it this podcast yet, but I did it in the previous one. The results of these two weekends, or these two races this weekend, and you can also put Benidorm in that category, are fairly irrelevant. You don't know what training riders are doing. Some came back from Spain yesterday, others came back earlier in the week. Some really want to perform here for the morale boost. Others don't feel they need such results to have reassurance going into the biggest event of the year. So factor all everything in, and it's a lot of unscrewing to really get the consensus of where who is. Obviously, Aerts and Van Toerenhout were solid, but again, they are riders that want to be on a podium of such a race. Let's look at the entire top 10 then. We've probably covered everyone we want already. Van der Poel took the win ahead of Van Aert, Nieuwenhuis, Wieseuren, Aerts, Van Toerenhout, Van der Haar, Zweek, Kuhn and Thomas Meen. Issam, anyone you still want to discuss in or outside of the top 10?
I think that for Van der Haar was a bit of a shame, because I felt that he was definitely... he was, I think, between Van Toerenhout and Aerts, but, he had his chain, I think, broke, and that didn't help. So, yeah, in the end, he was not really able to maintain that position. I think he would have been probably between both Van Toerenhout and Aerts. But other than that, I felt that, looking at the circumstances, the riders kind of placed where they have been for quite some time already. And there's not really, apart from the ones that we have highlighted with the Verstringen, also with an Iserbyt, and it is also a bit hard with these type of races, because there are sometimes punctures that we don't see, there are crashes that we also don't see. The broadcast was quite focused on the leading pack, and that makes it just a little bit more difficult to highlight someone. I don't know if you have someone that you want to point out.
No, I don't have any other riders to discuss, but what you mentioned about the chain of Van der Haar is interesting, because last week in Benidorm, Seppe van der Boer, also riding for the Baloise Glowy Lions, not the Trek Lions anymore, Baloise Glowy Lions. He also had a snap chain in the first lap. If you remember back to the start of the season, there was around the European Championships this big storyline about the new SRAM chains of the team breaking. It kind of quieted out afterwards, but it appears it's back now, so that's something to monitor tomorrow in Hogerheide. And of course, that surfacing a week before the World Championships is not good news. Speaking about those World Championships, here is a paid promo for them. The number of tickets are running out for the Sunday, so if you're still planning on going to the event, make sure to quickly buy your tickets for Saturday and Friday's mixed relay. Still plenty of availability. With that out of the way, Issam, let's move to the women's race, because that was a thriller, in my opinion, the race of the season. We did not have the fastest start for Mary Schreiber. The start-finish straight was too short for her to really utilize her sprint strength. In the first lap, we saw Fem van Empel have a puncture come into the pits, and from there her race spiraled out of control. She made a number of mistakes, resulting in crashes. She would never feature in contention for the victory. Who did? Up front were Zoe Bäckstedt, Blanka Vas, Puk Pieterse and Lucinda Brandt. In the first part of the race, it was Vas setting the pace, but just before the halfway point, Bäckstedt took over. She opened a 4-second gap, but crashed on the off-camber in the penultimate lap. She proceeded to do the same thing in the final lap, went into that lap with a 5-second lead. This time she tried to walk the off-camber, but still fell. That meant that Vas came back. She overtook Pieterse on the off-camber and opened a small lead. This lead became a bit bigger as Bäckstedt went into the pits following the crash, and that gap was never closed. That didn't mean that it wasn't tense. Brandt, who had started the final lap a bit further down, made a big move forward, overtaking Bäckstedt. On the final part of the course, Vas looked to have victory in the bag, but she nearly crashed on a very awkward big bump in the course. She nearly went airborne, but managed to save it. It did cost her some time. As they neared the final run-up, the final sprint by Brandt and Bäckstedt saw them come close, but not close enough. Vas looked behind, knew Bäckstedt was coming, and sprinted to the win on the short start-finish straight, ahead of Bäckstedt and Brandt. As said, Issam, I thoroughly enjoyed this race. It was one of the best women's races this season, perhaps the best. It had the unexpectedness. Vas and Bäckstedt were able to compete against Brandt and Pieterse. Alvarado and Van Empel didn't have it on the day. What made the difference here? To me, Vas was the most consistent out of the front riders. She made the least mistakes. For all the other riders, I can make the cases, well, they did this and this wrong, and in many it's just mistakes. Van Empel, too many mistakes on the technical sections. Pieterse pushing the limit too much, flipped on the barriers in the final lap, was already slow on the off-camber before. Brandt took the wrong line on the section following the stairs. That was the wrong riding line she took, but also took the wrong running line up there. Then was super slow on the remount. That was a big vulnerability for her. She perhaps didn't make too many mistakes there, but was just slow. She had a clear vulnerability, as did Bäckstedt. Her vulnerability was pretty much the technical skills, right? We know that she isn't the best despite making a lot of inroads there, and it showed on the off-camber. 2 crashes there, which cost her the win despite being arguably the strongest rider power-wise, as you could see on the second part of the course. Nevertheless, deserved victory by Vas. She certainly didn't steal it. She showed courage in the beginning, setting out fast. Had a bit of a weak moment in the middle of the race, but managed to recover really well from that. Came back to the leading group and finished it off, honestly, in quite calm fashion.
What I somewhat missed in Benidorm from Vas was finally somewhat displayed, because I think she had good legs. She was in very good shape, and the course was definitely something that she was able to get going through quite well. So then you have to take advantage of it, and especially on these type of courses, it's just, if you're ahead and you make a mistake, sure, you will lose some places or you might lose some ground, but at least it's not as significant as it would be if you are in position 4 or 5. And when you're a bit behind already and you make certain mistakes, it just, adds up in a way. I think that Vas rode great. The thing is, though, that I look at the race of Bäckstedt, and as you say, the mistakes that she made cost her in the end. Arguably the one that probably could have won it if it wasn't for Vas, because I think that today she had a very good day, better than she had, for sure, than she had in Zonhoven. For several times it looked like she could actually get away with it, but then the mistakes of Camber, it was sad to see. It was, in honesty, I don't want to compare it to it, but it was somewhat similar to Toon Aerts, although I would argue that his fumble was a bit larger than Bäckstedt's was. As you say, technically she isn't the best at it, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're able to somewhat get through the course without making significant mistakes, as some other competitors did today. We will go over that shortly, but I think that it was for Bäckstedt. It was, nevertheless, it is a race she can be very proud of, very strong, And yeah, I think that in terms of racing, it was a weird race to watch, because I think at a certain point it was, we saw Vas and Bakstad, and then it was Pietersen and Brand behind, Van Empel nowhere, and it was very weird to look at. And this is we shouldn't draw conclusions right now and say, oh my goodness, Liévin. And as we said before in the preview, these are the weekends where crazy results could happen. And I wouldn't call this totally crazy, but obviously it's a bit surprising what we have seen today.
It's surprising, and that's exactly what makes it dangerous. We cannot jump to conclusions based on this weekend only. I feel that Vas coming here is still a surprise, but also not a major surprise, right? We've spent quite excessive time in the past couple of weeks talking about Vas and the World Championship and how she's always informed towards such event. We mentioned it last year, right? She was really, really going at it in Hoogheide. She was really good there, but then missed the World Championships with illness. What I do want to remark about Vas is that it's remarkable, right? 4.5 years ago, she took her first World Cup win. That was in Overijse. Then it was also somewhat of a surprise. We remembered her from, of course, her results as a U23, U19. We saw her rise through the field. She made the decision to go all in on her cycling career. She moved to Belgium. She lived in like this upscale trailer in the garden of Jurgen Mettepenningen racing for his youth team. Ultimately, Mettepenningen didn't want to take the risk on Vas. She signed with Proximus. And eventually we know where she ended, right, at SD Works. We spent excessive time talking about, is that the right team for her? I'm still not entirely sure for the road, but things certainly seem to be clicking now. Her development has not been linear, and it cannot have been easy to go so long without a World Cup win. It's 3.5 years, not 4.5, but it's one of the longest, if not the longest gap between two wins in the World Cup for women. I didn't bother to check the men. There in Overijse, she came. The assumption was she's here to stay. This is the next big talent. Things are going to really go her way. She's been showing it on the road. She's now showing it in cross. Second place at the European Championships on the Vanberg. But then this new generation of riders came. Van Empel, Pietersen, Van Anrooy. It wasn't easy, but she's overcome that adversity, and that's such a vital part of an athlete's career. Being able to adapt after setbacks, overcoming disappointments, repacking yourself, restructuring yourself, trying different methods. It's finally worked. She's finally back, long overdue. She's back here on the top. Honestly, it's great to see Issam.
Yeah, and you could also see in the post-race interview, it meant a lot. It really meant a lot. She got emotional, and I think she has every reason to do so, because, for us it's quite easy to talk about the progress of a certain rider, but it is hard for us to judge the journey and what a rider has to go through to eventually reach the potential in a way. And it's you could see that it meant a lot for her that she was able to take the win. She obviously was also looking back at Overijse and probably had also certain expectations. And with Vas, it was definitely, especially if you look at cyclocross, there were definitely glimpses of that potential, but it was never what was portrayed at that time. And I think that is, for us, it's easy to go over. We basically say that the progress is that, and maybe the team is not good enough, and you go over those simple things. But it's for a rider, it's obviously a bit more complicated, because if they attach themselves to certain expectations, they will eventually end up in a situation in which they want to do better, and they know, or at least think that they can do better, but it just doesn't really come out, and circumstances. And I think Vas, in terms of how she is progressing on the road, definitely you can see the progress there, and also overall has been getting better and better. But I think that I said it a couple of weeks ago. I can't really pinpoint where I said it, but I think I said something along the line of Vas needs a result in which she kind of shows that potential is there. And I think today everything went well. The start went well. She went well through the race. She had a dip. She struggled a little bit midway through, and at a certain point it looked like the victory was, I wouldn't say slipping out of her hands, but it was slowly but surely fading. But she got it together again and was able to, be in the right positions at the right times, leaning out. I think that was crucial because with Maasmechelen today, especially on the women's side, we saw how crucial positioning was in a way. If you're behind someone that makes a mistake, you can really lose some ground. And it was, it was a great victory to see. Great for Cyclocross, great for her. And yeah, what a momentum she's now going to carry towards the Worlds. I think that is, you could see that it's definitely a great feeling. And we will see what it will do tomorrow and also at the Worlds.
As said, she is a dangerous rider for that event. Somebody who she won't face there is Zoe Bäckstedt. She's indicated that she isn't going to change her decision to race in the U23 race based on this result. I believe that's a wise decision. She made this decision before. We shouldn't overreact is what we've been saying, so it's probably wise to also not do that with Bäckstedt. We've covered her decision before. I would like to cover her race a bit because she made a very strong impression. You said she was better than in Zonhoven, and honestly, I think you're right there, because this course, yes, power mattered a lot, especially in the second section of the course. Still, you're required a certain level of technical capabilities, which Bäckstedt does not really possess. Those banks were not it for her. She made wise decisions running certain sections, for instance that downhill after the stairs. We saw Brandt nearly make a flip there. We saw other riders crash there. Bäckstedt was running down that like a maniac. It was different than how Brandt was running down. It was effective there because she was able to hang into the tape, putting her heels in the ground. I do feel that that same mentality of running hurt her when she decided to run the off-camber in the final lap. Yes, it was a bottle job. Definitely not of the proportion of Aerts in Namur, but without that, there is a very good possibility that she goes to the end. The running itself wasn't necessarily the problem. She crashed the lap before. It didn't look much slower to run, so I honestly get that decision. It was just a bit unfortunate, and it is, in all honesty, also a very tricky section there, right? We saw other riders running also coming into some difficulties there. I don't like that off-camber. The corner before pretty much takes most skill level out of it. It would be nicer if they kind of came in a straight line or something, or drop in after a 180 later, something like that. It would improve the feature. Regardless, on that tricky corner, Bäckstedt fell and it really ruined her chances of victory. At the end, I don't think she did anything wrong besides that. The bike change has been criticized by some people, but it makes sense to me. She crashed. You don't know what happened. Maybe her derailleur was bent. Maybe her derailleur hanger was bent, whatever. It's better to be safe then, and that didn't cost her the race. It's really the mistake that did. The pits were slow, but Bäckstedt's change in the final lap was quite good, so that's kind of what I think about her race.
Yeah, I can only agree with most of what you said, to be honest, all of it. I think that the bike change definitely didn't cost her the race. I think it was a wise and smart decision, but as I said already, I think it's just very difficult to overtake at certain sections, and I think that when Vas had the distance, it was easier for her to cover that. But I think that if you look at Bäckstedt's race overall, I think it was a very good race, and it's definitely certain moments in the race in which I thought she's running away with it in a way, and it was very strong. But yeah, in the end, cyclocross is not only about having good legs and having good moments. It's about winning the race in the end, and circumstances have always an influence on it, and crashes do their part as well. And I think that that is what Bäckstedt kind of received. Definitely deserved to win, but I think can be very pleased with second.
Vas and Bäckstedt will definitely be satisfied with these results. I can't imagine the riders behind are all too happy with it. I went over Brandt. She had that long section of vulnerability where she lost a lot of time by riding through the wrong line in the mud. Bäckstedt saw that in the first lap when Brandt was faster, copied it, also the running line there of Brandt, but it didn't really work out. In the final lap, Brandt simply decided to run the entire section, which time-wise was okay, but it definitely cost her some energy towards the end of the final lap. It was a bit weird to see her come to that complete halt in the downhill of the final bank. She really messed up her trajectory there. I can't imagine that was an intentional decision. Pieterse, she was on the edge for pretty much the entire race. She was up there after a bad start, definitely needed to spend some energy. Don't really blame her. She didn't have a front row call up, needed to find her way through the field on what is a course where it's very hard to move up. She was constantly on the edge, on the pressure. She was pushing her technical abilities to the limit, and I think she fell for the fatal flaw of wanting to stay on the bike too much. The barriers went worse every lap. She flipped there in the final lap. The off-camber she struggled with quite a bit. She didn't opt to run that like others did. And honestly, if you look further down, Van Empel can't be satisfied with this race. Too many mistakes, never properly got into it. Alvarado, kind of the story of the last weeks, doesn't seem to have the form to push for the world title next week. So, yeah, again, I don't want to draw too many conclusions based on this, but we're still in an interesting position ahead of the World Championships. But then again, tomorrow is Hoogheide, and we can be talking here completely differently after Van Empel has taken a win narrowly ahead of Brandt and Pieterse. And for Brandt, I want to bring up the fact that this is not a real good course for her. She relied too much on technical capabilities, and we know that despite a lot of improvements and that she's better than Backstedt, it's still something that isn't the best for her. She can't really utilize her raw power here as well. It's a bit more explosive.
I think in the end, Brandt can be happy with the race overall. I think that she also was relatively happy. Of course, you want to win, but I think she was happy that she was on the podium. For Pieterse, it was, yeah, I think it's hard to judge where Pieterse is at. I think that it is, obviously you could see that it was a hard race for her. But I think that in the end, considering, of course, this is the weekend before the World Championships, I feel that she is definitely someone that is eyeing that more and wants to be good there. So it's definitely not a bad thing if you are almost up there, but still not really there, because sometimes that can come in that last week. For Van Empel, I'm a bit worried about it, and not really because of form, because I think that she has good legs and she's in good form, but it's more the way she's dealing with setbacks. I feel that, you know, if something like that would occur in the Worlds, and I definitely don't wish it for her, but if something like that would happen, you know, you need to have some, I would say, fighting spirit in a way to you know, say, come on, let's pick it up again, let's continue, let's fight and focus and try to make the best out of it. And I felt that Van Empel today, for sure, the stakes are not that high, and sure, it's only a World Cup, but I feel that she kind of let it go a bit too easy, and it's sometimes these type of races that can really shape you up in when it really is going to matter, that can bring you that fighting spirit, because I felt that Van Empel definitely, if it was, you know, purely based on the form, I think she was definitely going to be up there. But that's not what, you know, with all the setbacks, it was just never really coming out. And she was also, mentally, she was not really in it. And Alvarado, to be honest, is a bit different, because I think that for her, it was not really the legs that were good, but it was, you know, she was fighting for it. But I think that she is kind of the opposite. The legs are not really there. She wants to be at the front. She wants to be racing. And you saw the frustration with Bakker when she tried to cut off Bakker and was not really happy with her with her existence there, which I think that was a bit, you know, I don't think that was really clean of Alvarado. That was definitely something she shouldn't have been doing, the move there, pushing her a little bit away. But I think there's really some frustration there with the form and not really being happy how the race went. So it's, there's some, you know, some are quite positive. Definitely the podium, you can look at all three, to be honest, and they can really pick the positive out of this race. I think Pieterse also is not going to be that disappointed. Obviously, that crash with the barriers wasn't the greatest, and there is still something to learn there. But Alvarado and Van Empel, definitely the two that they really want to set the record straight tomorrow, and we will see if that's going to happen.
Just to wrap up on Van Empel, we have seen that fighting spirit this season, right? In Baal, she stormed her way to the front, not giving up. In Benidorm and at the European Championships, we saw a killer instinct in her, which we haven't seen in her too often. They are there, but what we've concluded this season is that Van Empel is not physically as dominant as last year, and is that down to her not being as good or the others being better? That's a bit up in the air. Regardless of that, her technical vulnerabilities, which she could get away with last year, have been exploited this year, and today is just yet another example of that. She gave an interview to the media, I don't recall which paper I read it in, when she was on training camp. She kind of took a bit of a dig at some of the media reporting on her, saying that she felt her season was way better than that was being portrayed. I do agree that in Belgium they've perhaps been a bit overly harsh on her. She's only missed this podium twice this season. It is fair to conclude it's not as good as last season, but we also need to be a bit realistic, right? Last season was a unprecedented high bar. She only lost 2 races and only finished off the podium once. That is extremely tough to beat or even equal. So that this season is slightly less, okay, but it's still Van Empel. She's still the world champion. She still won a bunch of races. Again, let's not overreact. There is a realistic possibility that she gets beaten next week, but there's also a very real possibility she goes for the 3-peat. So let's factor that in. If we look at the entire top 10, Issam, we see that behind the riders we discussed, so Vas, Bakstedt, Brandt, Pieters, Alvarado and Van Empel, we find Manon Bakker ahead of Inge van der Heijden, Marie Schreiber in 9th and Sarah Casasola in 10th. Considering the time and the fact that we're both attending Hoogrijden tomorrow, I suggest we keep it quite short and just keep it to the mentions. Schreiber had a decent race. She was up there in the start, had a horrible second lap, unsure if there was a crash or a puncture, came forward, had a blistering final lap, finished 9th. Interesting with the eye on the U23 World Championships, also the fact that Isabella Holmgren wasn't too far behind. Casasola remains a bit inconsistent. And then finally Vos, who added this race to her program, scored some points, but not as much as she'd hoped for. She had a puncture which set her back. Good. I think that will wrap it up. Issam, thank you for being here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
See you tomorrow in Hoogrijden. We will, of course, wrap up the World Cup season with a podcast, then World Championships preview and World Championship podcast. Thanks everyone for listening and catch you guys soon. Goodbye.